Hey guys, it's TheFrXion here, Tank12, however you call me, I don't really care. Welcome back to World of Tanks, where we are today taking a look at the E75 TS. This is a German Tier 8 premium heavy tank, and I never expected Wargaming to release a E75 at Tier 8, but they have gone ahead and done it a couple of years ago. This is probably one of the better Tier 8 premium heavy tanks for the German tech tree or the German nation. The Mauerbrecher is probably the worst one. The Löwe is pretty good. It's pretty impressive. The armor, the mobility, everything about the Löwe is actually quite decent. The E75 kind of slots into that place between the Löwe and the Mauerbrecher. Some players probably would say the E75 TS is maybe better than the Löwe, but I think it's better than the VK and the Mauerbrecher, which both are premium tanks, but just one of them is really, really awful, which is the Mauerbrecher. Either way, today we're going to be talking about this tank and no other vehicle. It has a 105mm gun. This 105mm gun is quite competitive. 360 alpha damage, that's what you kind of expect of a 100mm gun. 227mm of penetration with the AP shell. 282mm of penetration with the APCR shell. And only 60mm with the high explosive shell. What all of these shells have in common though is the very good shell velocity. AP shell has 1100 meters per second. The APCR shell 1375 and the high explosive shell 1100. So you're not going to have to aim very long or lead your shots very much because a majority of your shells is going to fly quite quickly. So you don't have to worry too much about that. Yeah, so the tank has a decent pen. It has a decent rate of fire. For a tier 8 heavy tank at least, 6.29 rounds per minute with Brothers in Arms and a gun rammer, which I would highly recommend using on this tank. Gun traverse speed of 26.4 degrees per second, and that is with some equipment to boost it, which I would really recommend as well. Right here, improved rotation mechanism, because the tank feels a bit sluggish without the additional assistance when you need to turn your tank or your turret. 8 degrees of gun depression is very, very nice. 15 degrees of gun elevation, on the other hand, is decent. Can't complain too much about it, but 20 would have been better. 2.46 seconds aim time. Takes a bit longer than some other German vehicles, but the dispersion values are actually quite decent. 0.35 with the right consumables, and if you use premium consumables, which I would not recommend since you're trying to earn credits, you can get it down to 0.33 and increase the DPM by another 100 damage per minute. Either way, I usually do not run premium consumables on these tanks unless I have to free mark them. DPM is also not too bad. You can certainly do a bit of damage. I went with improved hardening class 1, which gives me additional hit points, and it's been worth it so far. Why not use that specialty slot if you have available? If you have it available. Hull armor at the front is 120mm thick, 80 on the side and 80 at the back. The turret is quite nicely armored with 230mm at the front, 120 on the side and 80 at the back. One main problem are these two viewports. They're actually very easy to penetrate, and if I had a mod which shows you the penetration stats and the armor thickness, these 2 points would be some serious weak spots. You also have a cupola on top, which is easy to hit, and your turret ring is actually quite large and exposed in certain areas. Still, the turret holds up quite nicely, so you do not have to be afraid. In medium to longer range engagements, most vehicles won't be able to go through, but in close quarter combat, just be cautious of the two viewports, that they can actually be penetrated, and the cupola on top. Moving on to mobility, the tank has some very spectacular top speed, 45 kph. and the specific power to weight ratio is not too bad either because it has a very big engine in it. It also weighs a ton, 93.5 tons. It's max load you have on this vehicle. Yeah, it's pretty hefty. It will actually ram things and kill them quite decently. Traverse speed actually doesn't look too bad, but I've really buffed it with all the equipment and the skills, and you really need to do it because it takes a very long time to get this tank to turn. The soft stats are way worse than they are being displayed here. The traverse speed is a lot worse than it is being shown here in the characteristics. Concealment and spotting, we can kind of skip concealment. It's a heavy tank. You shouldn't expect it to be very stealthy, but it has decent view range, 390 meters base view range. I don't think you can complain about that. With the right crew, you can get it to 433. With premium consumables, you can go all the way to 450 meters. So that's pretty damn good for a tier 8 heavy tank. Now let's take a look at the field modifications, and then we're going to go over to the gameplay. I went with lightweight suspension to give you more hull traverse speed, parallax adjustment for a better aim circle, periscope electric drive, which gives me better view range but at the cost of stun duration, and finally I went with firepower instead of mobility because I think the tank itself is already quite mobile, and in the end it doesn't really matter too much, because if I put the improved rotation mechanism, it will count either for mobility or firepower, because I think turning the tank is way more important than getting an additional 2.5% on the gun rammer. I have chosen to go for the rotation mechanism instead of the gun rammer. Now, equipment wise, generally speaking, I think this is the equipment I would be running. You could also go with improved ventilations in the first slot. You don't have to get that additional HP boost. You get a little bit better DPM, better gun handling, all of that combined together. It's going to make a pretty nice tank. Other than that, I mean, I don't even know which equipment I would choose. You don't need enhanced gun lane drive. You don't need vertical stabilizer. I think tank itself is quite accurate enough. You're going to be able to hit the targets at longer ranges as well. It's not the most accurate German tank if you compare it to the Löwe 0.32, but 0.35 is actually not something that is exclusively terrible. I mean, the KB5 is at 0.37. You can still snipe with that thing. So, I mean, why can't you snipe with a E75 TS? So what's so special about this tank, and why are you watching this review? Are you expecting an E75 at tier 8? Well, that's kind of what you're getting. The lower and upper plate are very much identical to the E75, but they're a lot weaker. The lower plate is probably below 120 millimeters thick, so maybe about 80 to 90 millimeters thickness, or maybe 100. But it's quite easy to go right through. Also, the side of the vehicle, it's quite long. It's a very big target, and the upper plate is almost auto ricochet for a lot of shells. But the turret is quite sturdy unless you start shooting the exact spots that I've mentioned prior. So it's basically a E75 that is stock but faster than the E75. If we go over to the E75 real fast and we take a look at the mobility of that thing, you can see that the top speed is also 40 kph or close to 45, which is on the E75 TS, but the specific power to weight ratio is quite bad, 9.75 horsepower per ton. So it's going to take a very long time for you to accelerate to that speed. That's something you don't have to worry about with the E75 TS, which makes it even more dangerous in my opinion, because having that and the armor and the speed and the ramming potential makes this vehicle quite interesting and quite dangerous. So without further ado, let's jump into some gameplay and then have a final verdict on what I think of the E75 TS and if it is worth I don't know, the $50 price tag when it is being sold again. Okay, so we're gonna take a look at the E75 TS and what the tank actually feels like in a tier 8 and 7 and yeah, well, tier 8-7 matchup. This is where you can really utilize the armor potential to the max, because the tank itself is quite nicely armored, as we have seen in the prior characteristics, having 120 millimeters of armor at the front, and some very nice angling to go with it. The lower plate is going to be an obvious weak spot though, but other than that, at tier 7 this tank is probably not going to have a lot of issues facing all kinds of threats here. In tier 8 and 9, the armor does kind of weaken a little bit, especially at tier 9. There are a lot of tanks that can cut right through, but if you have the patience and if you have a little bit of game knowledge, I think you can make the armor work very, very nicely indeed. The one thing that I just wanted to really kind of address and point your attention to is the mobility that you have, because we were the first tank to move into position here from the spawn. And that also includes the enemy team, except for the TVP-100, which is obviously a lightly armored tank destroyer who is a lot faster. But we were much faster than the AMX M449, the IS, and the IS-2S. So keep that in mind. Mobility on this tank is really, really great, at least in terms of top speed and acceleration. You have 16 horsepower per ton, so that's really, really great because you have like 1,300 horsepower on your engine. So you're going to be moving from one place to another fairly quickly without too many issues. The other thing that is also quite great about the tank is the gun. I really like the gun. It has 227 millimeters of penetration, which is going to be just cutting through basically most of tier 8 and tier 9 even. If that doesn't suffice, you still have the 282 millimeters of APCR penetration. And you can see this AMX M449 doesn't really have any ability or any chance of going through our tank in this position that we're currently in, and the armor does work fairly well in a scenario where you can hide your lower plate. So this is basically an E75 that is faster, that is at tier 8, can meet tier 6 tanks and tier 7 vehicles, which the E75 can too, at least meet tier 7 tanks. But it has also this very nice additional element of mobility, or at least top speed, which will get you from point A to B fairly quickly. And this 105mm gun is fairly competitive as well, especially in the close quarter combat. 360 alpha with this gun is really nice and is something that I think a majority of the players will very much like when they play this tank. Now if you compare the AMX M449L, this tank used to have pretty decent armor, still has very good armor in my opinion, and it also has a 100mm gun that used to do like more than enough damage in my opinion for a tier 8 heavy tank. Like 300 alpha damage was definitely the go-to, and now we've kind of gone past the 300 alpha damage, and we are now at above 3,000 alpha 300 alpha damage at tier 8 for the heavy tanks. 360 is now almost the new norm, so that's quite crazy if you think about it. The accuracy, on the other hand, as I mentioned prior, is not the best. You can get it down, but it's not like it's a Guerrilla or some kind of German tank destroyer, so you have to keep that in mind whenever you play the E75 TS. Wargaming want you to play this vehicle in a close quarter role and not in a role where you kind of play the sniping heavy tank far at the back. Even though the armor would work, it's not the role that is intended for the vehicle. One of the major downsides still for the tank itself is the very bad turn time for either the turret and the tracks. 26 degrees per second turn time on the tracks is fairly horrific. And what I also noticed is when you are driving with this tank, it actually takes quite a bit of time to turn your tracks, so the ground resistances must be quite horrible with the vehicle itself. At least that's what I've noticed. But having this kind of gun, having the rate of fire of base like 5.31 rounds per minute, which is pretty damn good in my opinion, you're gonna have a very competitive tier 8 heavy tank that can withstand and withstand a lot of damage, and at the same time deal a lot of damage as well. So I think the E75 TS is certainly a nice tier 8 premium tank, but it does have some weak spots that we should address probably before we kind of round up this review. It has these two eyes, which are viewports for binoculars, I think, for the gunner and the commanders. They are actually weak spots. You can go right through them. That's one of the things you have to keep in mind. The cupola on top, you can go through as well. And since the turret is kind of rounded, you can see that the gun, like the gun mantle that is at the front, is also protruding quite far out right here. So you can just shoot this part and still do damage. Now, if you can track this tank on the side, and you can track it like this, you can do a lot of damage to it. Other than that, if you hit the side, if you hit the rear, most of the shots will go through and do damage. There's no spaced armor, so there's no weird magic there, except for a little bit of spaced armor in the turret, as you can see. These sheets actually are counted as armor, and I think they maybe give you like 5mm more armor or spaced armor. But other than that, the side turret is probably one place where you can easily go through this tank. So it's going to be like the E75. As soon as you turn the turret a little bit around, you're going to be an easy target for other vehicles. That's what you have to keep in mind, because the turret is going to be easily penetrated, and it takes a long time to turn the turret in the right direction you need to aim and fire at. So overall, I think this is a fairly good premium heavy tank. It kind of goes into the modern category of premium tanks. Ticks all the boxes. It has decent center pen, decent armor, very good premium ammunition penetration. It has very good mobility, so you can always keep up, even if the games are like this, like a total blowout, 15-6. It's not a total blowout, but it was a pretty clean win, let's put it like that. And yeah, spotting is not even that bad. 390 meters space view range. You can up that all the way to maybe 430. 440 without any equipment. So yeah, it's a very good tank. If you like the E75 at tier 9, I think you're gonna like this. And it's probably one of the better German heavy premium tanks. I think it's better than the VK. I think it's better than the Mauerbecher. It might be better than the Löwe if you prefer to be more mobile or faster. But if you like to have more reliable armor, the Löwe is probably the better option. Other than that, this is a very good tank, and I think a lot of players will enjoy it. So, hope you guys did enjoy. I'm going to be doing something else for now. I've played a little bit of World Tanks. I still have to make a couple of videos for the next week. But I hope you guys are having a nice weekend, and I'll see you guys on the next video.